One of the most interesting aspects of dismissive avoidance is how strongly they hold on to independence. They present it like protective armor, convincing themselves and others that they have no need for support. They often say they are fine on their own, that relationships are complicated, uncertain, and exhausting. For a while, this seems convincing. They create a self-contained life where they decide to pace, keep others at a distance, and avoid vulnerability. On the surface, it may look like strength, but in reality, it is a defense. This defense is so practiced and refined that they come to believe it is genuine freedom. Yet the truth is clear: no matter how detached someone tries to be, loneliness eventually appears. It does not respect strategies, barriers, or personal narratives of not needing others, because people are naturally wired for connection. Human beings are social by nature. Even if this need is buried under years of self-reliance, it remains present, quietly operating beneath the surface. Eventually it surfaces, and when it does, dismissive avoidants begin to feel the results of their own choices. Consider this: at first, when they push others away, they justify it as necessary. They tell themselves, "I need space, I prefer freedom, I work better alone." In the short term, this belief feels safe and gives a sense of control. But over time, things shift. The silence that once felt like peace begins to feel like emptiness. Solitude, which once seemed like proof of strength, starts to feel heavy. This is where loneliness begins to take hold, not suddenly, but gradually. It shows up on a weekend evening when there is no one to share simple joys with. It appears when they scroll through contacts and notice how many conversations have faded away. It is there when they return home, place their keys down, and realize there is no one to ask about their day. The quiet is present, but it lacks warmth. This is when the realization forms that something important is missing. Psychologically, avoidants are shaped to see closeness as risky. Early experiences may have taught them that relying on others brings disappointment, judgment, or control. As a result, they build an identity focused on self-protection. Still, despite that protective stance, the nervous system continues to seek connection. This is not a matter of preference, but of biology and survival. Human beings are not designed to live in isolation. The very thing avoidants try to escape, deep human connection, is the same thing their mind and body are built to need. The breaking point comes when the balance shifts, when the story they tell themselves, "I don't need anyone," collides with the reality of emotional hunger, and that hunger eventually prevails. Because no one can deny the need for connection forever without consequence. Anxiety begins to appear, restlessness grows, and at times it shows up as irritation or frustration. Underneath it all lies the same truth: the absence of connection becomes too heavy to bear. That is when the call happens, the message is sent, or contact is made unexpectedly. They reach out not because they have suddenly changed who they are, but because the loneliness has grown louder than the fear of closeness. It is in that exact moment, when silence no longer feels safe, but instead suffocating, that the dismissive avoidant makes contact. This breaking point is not only about avoidance, it reflects a broader human reality. Every person struggles at some stage with the tension between independence and closeness. People want to feel capable and self-reliant, yet they also want to be seen, understood, and valued. The error is believing these must be opposites. In truth, strength does not mean standing alone. Real strength is in having the courage to let others in, even when it feels uncertain. When a dismissive avoidant reaches out, it is not a random act. It is the collapse of the story they have maintained. It is the quiet admission, spoken or unspoken, that they cannot do everything alone. For anyone who has been on the receiving end of such a message, the weight of that moment is clear. It demonstrates something we often forget: even those who appear most independent, untouchable, or resistant to closeness are still human, and all humans need connection. That is the breaking point. The lesson here is important. You do not need to wait until loneliness forces you to change before you allow people in. Do not let self-protection turn into confinement. Do not wait until silence feels overwhelming before choosing connection. Independence has value, but meaningful connection is what gives life depth. Another striking aspect of dismissive avoidance is their skill at compartmentalization. They can take a relationship or even an entire period of life and mentally lock it away as though it never happened. They convince themselves they have moved forward, that the emotions tied to that experience no longer matter, that the past requires no revisiting. For a time, this approach seems to work. They keep going, they stay occupied, throw themselves into work, distractions, or habits that bring comfort. But no matter how strong their defenses are, there is one thing they cannot fully control: memory. And memory is not like a still photograph that simply rests in the mind. It is emotional, sensory, and embodied. When a familiar trigger appears, a song on the radio, the smell of a favorite meal, or a place tied to someone once close, it bypasses the barriers they have built. In that moment, the sealed mental box is no longer sealed. It opens, and the emotions they tried to avoid come flooding back. This is nostalgia, and it is far more than sentiment. It is one of the most powerful emotional forces people experience. Psychological research shows that nostalgia is not just about recalling events. It is about reconnecting with the emotions of those moments, the warmth, the sense of belonging, the comfort of times when security and joy felt real. For dismissive avoidants, nostalgia can be particularly challenging because it reveals what they have been denying, that connection mattered, and it still does. Picture someone sitting in their car when a song plays, the one tied to an early memory of closeness. Suddenly, defenses fade. They remember the laughter, the comfort of being understood without explanation, the fleeting feeling of safety. In that moment, the memory does not feel distant, it feels alive. And the story they have repeated, "I don't need anyone," falls apart under the weight of lived experience. The deeper impact of nostalgia is this: it does not only bring back the memory of another person, but also the memory of the self that existed in that relationship. That version was softer, more open, and more willing to be vulnerable, even if brief. Nostalgia revives both the connection and the part of the self that once allowed it. This is why nostalgia cuts deeply. It bypasses logic and reasoning. It does not rely on thought. It is felt. It shows up as a lump in the throat, a sting in the eyes, or an ache in the chest. It is unfiltered emotion, and no matter how avoidant someone may try to be, no one is immune to its force. Often it is in this state that they decide to reach out, sometimes in the quiet hours of the night. Sometimes it happens after a few drinks when their defenses slip, or on a quiet Sunday when the silence feels too heavy. They reach for the phone, not because it was planned, not because they suddenly became a different person, but because nostalgia uncovered a truth they could no longer ignore. They miss connection, they miss the presence of another, and they miss the version of themselves that felt alive in that closeness. Here lies the paradox: the very thing they have been avoiding, the intensity of emotional closeness, is exactly what nostalgia revives. It cannot be outrun because it is tied to memory, and memory is inseparable from identity. This carries meaning for anyone who has doubted whether they mattered to someone who pulled away, or questioned whether they ever truly felt. Avoidance does not erase emotion, it only postpones its confrontation. Eventually a memory breaks through, and when it does, it shows what was always true. You mattered, and in many ways, you still do. The larger lesson extends beyond avoidance. It speaks to the role of memory in all life. The moments of connection, the shared experiences, the laughter and the closeness, do not vanish simply because time passes or distance grows. They remain within us. At any moment, something as small as a song or a familiar scent can bring them back in vivid detail. That is both the gift and the responsibility of being human. What we share does not disappear, it echoes. So when nostalgia arises, it can be viewed not as pain, but as evidence. Evidence that connection leaves a lasting mark. It proves that the care and presence offered become part of another's story, whether acknowledged or not. The essential point is this: nostalgia reminds us that connection is not optional, it is fundamental. For dismissive avoidance, this realization often comes later than expected. It is the recognition of what has been lost. Avoidance operates under the illusion of unlimited time, endless chances, and constant availability. They reassure themselves, if I want that person back, I can always reach out. If I ever need them, they'll still be there. This belief creates a quiet sense of certainty, not from malice, but from self-protection. They convince themselves that those they push away remain waiting in the background, ready whenever they choose to return. Yet reality does not follow that script. When the truth of this settles in, everything shifts. The realization rarely arrives dramatically. It is not sudden like lightning, but gradual, like erosion. Perhaps they hear from mutual contacts that someone has moved forward. Perhaps they see a photograph of a smile shared with another, someone now occupying the space once turned away. Or sometimes it arrives, even more quietly. It is the recognition that the door they assumed would always stay slightly open has finally closed. That is when regret begins to surface. That is when the loss becomes undeniable. Regret is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. It carries a weight and sharpness that can cut more deeply than fear or anger. For avoidance, regret is especially powerful because it collides directly with their sense of identity. Their lifelong story has been, "I do not need closeness. I am fine on my own. People are replaceable." But when regret arrives, that story unravels. They are forced to confront the reality that closeness did matter, that connection was wanted, and that in avoiding it they lost something that cannot be replaced. This is more than emotional, it is philosophical. Loss makes us face the limits of our choice. It reminds us that every door closed is not one we can always reopen. For dismissive avoidance, this realization can be unsettling because much of their life has been built on the belief that they control when and how connection happens. They believe they could keep others at a distance and still find them waiting. Yet life shows otherwise. People move forward, opportunities pass, and time does not pause for anyone's readiness. This is where urgency enters. The awareness of loss, the recognition that the past cannot be undone, often sparks a kind of panic. The avoidant, once calm and detached, begins to feel the opposite, restless, anxious, even desperate, because what they assumed was permanent, such as presence, patience, or affection, turns out not to be permanent at all. That is often the moment they finally reach out, not because they have mastered intimacy, not because they have transformed overnight, but because the fear of losing someone forever now outweighs the fear of closeness. Here lies a lesson for everyone. The truth of regret and loss is not limited to avoidance. Each of us struggles with the difference between taking others for granted and valuing them while they are here. We assume those we love will always remain available. We assume opportunities will circle back. We assume time will wait until we are ready. But the reality is different. Nothing is guaranteed. Not relationships, not second chances, not even tomorrow. This is why the moment of realization matters. When a dismissive avoidant finally recognizes the reality of loss, they are also waking up to a universal truth. Connection is not an endless resource. It is not something to return to only when convenient. It is fragile. It requires attention, care, and courage. When neglected, it fades. Perhaps you have been on the receiving end of such a late awakening. Perhaps someone who once made you feel unseen has suddenly reached out, expressing that they miss you and regret letting you go, and you may wonder if those words are genuine. They are. The timing may come late, the effort may feel unpolished, but the realization is authentic. No one avoids the weight of loss forever. And here is what matters for you. Do not wait for loss to teach you its lessons. Do not wait until the door is closed before appreciating what is on the other side. If you value someone, tell them. If you love someone, show it. If you have been holding back, assuming there will always be more time, take action now. Regret is the cost of waiting too long. So when dismissive avoidants finally reach out, it is not only about them missing someone. It is about their encounter with the same truth we all must face. Love does not wait, connection does not wait, and life does not pause until we are ready.